DFO PvP, a mode that can be quite frustrating but also fun to play once learned. Unfortunately, the game doesn't have a tutorial to teach you PvP, so I thought I'd fill in the gap. So without further ado, let's get straight into the basics. Now before we get into combos and resets and all that fun stuff, I wanted to get into what I think DFO is at its core. And at its core, I believe the game is about positional advantage and cooldown rotation. Now if that sounds confusing to you as a newbie, don't be, because I have the perfect example for you at round start. In most fighting games, both players are set into a neutral position in the middle of the stage to where neither player can move until the round call has been completed. But in DFO, each player is set towards the edge of the screen, with the opponent's position being represented by a name tag due to their distance towards the player. This allows for certain classes to line up their skills with your name tag and hit you at round start. In order to remedy this, you're supposed to do something that makes Dungeon Fighter unique, and that's moving vertically during the round start countdown. This will make your opponent guess your round start position and allow you to punish them for doing something too committal at round start. This is just one example of many of how important positioning can be inside of a single DFO match. And if you don't believe me, there is literally a fairy in the game whose sole purpose is to boost your speeds so you can approach and get into position easier. Therefore, this concept will be the foundation on which this guide is built upon, because if you master this, you will become a force to be reckoned with in PvP. Now that we know the importance of positioning, the question becomes, how do we do it effectively? And the first place we should start with is with our controls. Controls, no matter the game, determine how difficult it is to execute certain techniques. Think about it. In first-person shooters, they ask the question, what's your mouse sensitivity? And in fighting games, they ask the question, what type of controller do you use? So in DFO, the question becomes, what's your hotkey setup? Keep in mind, I'm not referring to your hotkeys themselves, because that's up to user preference, but instead I'm referring to the skills you choose to place in them. So here are some quick guidelines to help you in that regard. For one, it's a good idea to put all approach tools with a low cooldown on your most comfortable buttons, because you'll be using these frequently to either hit your opponent or control a space. The second guideline is that any skill that gives you great mobility for you to close distance or escape should also be on a comfortable hotkey. Thirdly, any move that allows you to guard or do any evasive maneuver should be on a button that's readily available that you can press without having to think about it. And lastly, any buff that you can do should be done manually and does not belong on the hotkey bar. With all those guidelines out the way, you should now be able to form an optimal setup for your hands. This is great for you because now you can spend less time messing up and more time learning. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get straight to the point and figure out, how do we approach? The first thing I want to say about approaching is that it is not like PvE. You cannot just roll up on your opponent and just press the X button. That will lead you into watching your character get juggled repeatedly for a whole minute, which will make you quit and go right back to PvE. Instead, we're going to need a more methodical approach, and it all starts with knowing our ranges. In order to know our ranges, we're going to need to go into battle practice mode and test each and every skill in our skill list. And while you're doing this, you'll come across your approach tools. And you should definitely make note of these because your opponent will be actively trying to avoid them. You'll know an approach tool is good if it matches any of these four attributes. A, it has a low cooldown and it knocks the opponent off balance. B, it has great mobility. C, it has good Y-axis range, and D, it has startup super armor. If it just matches one of those attributes, it's a good approach, and if it has two or more, I guarantee you it's a cube skill, which is a move that you do not want to whiff due to their long cooldown. In order to show you my point, I brought forth the perfect example of this. It's round start, and so I'm running up on my opponent, and I notice the first thing he does is run away and cast a buff. I saw that the buff was leaked, so I knew he'd be jumping high, and based off of our distance, I knew that he would not do a dive attack on his way down because I was far outside of his range. And while he was jumping, I noticed he was going up towards the y-axis, lining up with my X, and therefore I did a movement approach, hitting him at max range where he did not expect it. Now let's see that clip at normal speed. Just make sure you pay attention to the timer at the bottom right. All of that happened in under 5 seconds. Since that happened in under 5 seconds, do you think that I thought about all that in that short time frame? The answer is no. The only thing I was paying attention to was what he was doing. So I saw the leap, and I saw the jump, and I saw the trajectory of his jump, and I knew what my character could do about it because of the time that I spent understanding her ranges. In other words, that was all instinct. Now, when you get to the point to where you instinctually know where your ranges are, you have officially reached character mastery. So every loss that you've had, you will know that it's because of a decision you made, or maybe you just didn't know the class that you were fighting. But now you would know that you're not killing yourself, but that your opponent was actually doing something in order to beat you. Now, there's a lot more I can say on the topic of approaching, but I'll leave you guys with one last thing, and that's cooldown rotation. As you know, every skill in DFO has a cooldown before it can be used again. So the goal is to make your opponent waste their primary cooldowns so that you can have an easier approach. Now, the way you do this is by stepping inside of their range and then stepping right on out. So the rules of what ranges to step in and out of change depending on the class that you're fighting. So I'll leave you with this last tip regarding this topic. Play to learn. Don't play to win, because when you start to play to learn, you give yourself the grace to forgive yourself when you start losing, so you can just start doing better next time. And when you start adapting this mindset, you'll start to see little openings in your opponent's gameplay, which will allow you to get more successful approaches. And when you get more successful approaches, this provides you a lot more opportunities to land a few. Combos in DFO are quite freeform, so they tend to be adjusted for the skills that you have off cooldown. This means that you can drag your combos out in order to stall for a certain cooldown, or you can end your combos ASAP so there'll be less opportunities for a miss. The only reason you have this choice is because of Dungeon Fighter's unique damage cap system. In the game, you have 3 combo states: standing, air, and ground. Each combo state has a damage cap represented by this icon. This means that the game will actively work against you so that way it can drop your combo. For standing, the opponent will fall down. For air, intense gravity. And for the ground, they'll immediately stand up. The one you really don't want is the ground one, because the opponent can hit you the second the cap is reached. Therefore, you should avoid that one at all costs. And there are only 2 ways to avoid the damage cap. You can either switch into a different combo state or go for a reset. Now, this topic can get quite complex. So for the sake of this guide that is aimed at beginners, I will only teach you how to hold a basic air combo. In order for an air combo to get started, you need a launcher, which is typically your Z button. Once launched, you can stall out the combo by only doing basic attacks until your Z button is off cooldown. Depending on your class, your basic attack stall will be different. For some, it's dash attacks, others jump, and for most, it's the regular basic attack. Once you have your stall sequence set, you should never be able to drop a combo unless you get a miss. Now you can start to implement skills, and how you do that depends on what class you chose. Just know that once you reach the damage cap, now is your time to do as much burst damage as possible before the opponent hits the ground. But once they do, get a few extra hits in and leave. You have to leave. Otherwise, you'll get punished yourself for overstaying your welcome. And that is the basic guideline for DFO combos. Now, obviously, I couldn't cover everything there is to know about this game. For instance, I didn't cover warping, resets, and combo decay. Things like this would take a while to explain, and I didn't want to overload a beginner who just wants to try DFO PvP. So I'm going to leave you a few resources to answer any information that you may have regarding your specific class. 1. If you want to know how your class is built or how it plays, I left a link down below on how you can look that up. Just know that the gameplay is in Korean, but you don't even have to look at that. Just look at their hotkey bar and how they play, and you'll know everything you need to know about your class, because DFO PvP is pretty simple. As for English resources, here are 2 people that actively stream DFO, and they both participate into PvP. So feel free to pull up and ask them a question. They seem pretty solid, so I'm sure they'll be happy to help you. And that's all I had to say. If I kept your attention for this long, go ahead and give me a like and subscribe if you want to follow me as I cover DNF Duel. And with that being said, people, we are about to head out.